After an explosive climax, Gojo vs Sukuna has finally come to an end, and it has left many with a very memorable taste in their mouths, whether it be good or bad. Week by week, this fight had many viewers from each side representing their fighter with much passion, but throughout these weeks, the fight did seem to be pretty one-sided, with Gojo always being on the offensive, landing multiple attacks and overwhelming Sukuna with his extremely versatile, yet powerful Limitless. Then suddenly, Sukuna just lands a devastating blow on Gojo, instantly ending the battle by cutting him in half. Kinda weird, huh? Well, I have come to reread the fight a couple of times, and now, with the release of 236, I see it in a completely different perspective. And after this video, I believe you will as well. Although Gojo seemed to be dominating the fight for majority of the chapters, Sukuna had a plan cooking up and deviously hinted at this plan being executed a couple of times in this battle. Yet, he hit it so well that he even had majority of the audience fooled. In this video, I'll be breaking down each time Sukuna may have played you and other viewers in his fight against Gojo, and other moments that hint toward the result of this battle. Hopefully, you guys enjoy. But before we get into it, I just want to point out that only 5% of viewers are subscribed. If you enjoy the content, feel free to subscribe. We both win in the end, right? Now, let's get into it. When we first enter Gojo vs Sukuna, Gojo launches a massive purple towards Sukuna, to which Sukuna was barely able to dodge. Gojo and Sukuna land onto the battlefield and trash talk one another. But something Sukuna says stands out. This quote being, "You are but a fish atop my chopping board, Gojo Satoru." A bit fresher than the others, but still just a nameless fish. So let's start by peeling off those scales. This quote does seem like typical trash talk with a hint of praise towards Gojo from the King of Curses. But now with the explanation provided in chapter 236, I'm inclined to believe that this was Sukuna hinting that he'd find a way to remove the limitless barrier from Gojo, as the scales that Sukuna speaks of peeling off could be likened to the impenetrable barrier that is created from the limitless that Gojo uses. For Sukuna to actually harm Gojo, he needs to remove this barrier, or in other words, peel off Gojo's scales. With Sukuna deciding to phrase his declaration of defeating Gojo in a way that prioritizes eliminating his scales, or in other words his barrier, you could also make the assumption that Sukuna went into this fight seeking the answer to not just defeating Gojo, but defeating every single Limitless and 6-Eye user for the rest of time. In this same chapter, Sukuna uses his dismantle and shoots it at Gojo, most likely with the intention of making Gojo believe that he needs to use hand signs in order to use this technique, the same way that Gojo uses hand signs to activate his techniques. After this, Sukuna does not use his slashing curse technique until he uses it to kill off Gojo. The fact that Sukuna doesn't truly need to use hand signs to use this technique, combined with Kashimo's statement of the efficiency of Sukuna's curse energy usage being godlike, these factors indicate that Sukuna could do some serious damage with or without ritualistic enhancements for his techniques, so him cutting Gojo without the enhancement is believable. It's more than likely that Sukuna did this to prepare the sneak attack that he'd land on Gojo in chapter 236, using the short hit cleave on Gojo without him even realizing it, since he'd believed that Sukuna would need to activate a hand sign, where in truth, Sukuna can simply think of this technique and it would manifest. Something else that stands out in this moment is Gojo's reaction to Sukuna's dismantle being shot towards him in the first place. Here, it seems as if he's unsure whether or not Sukuna can actually cut through his limitless already, and once the dismantle hits the building instead of Gojo, he was likely to confirm that it cannot cut through the limitless. I want to say that this contributes heavily to the final cleave, because it's the final time that Sukuna uses his slashes as a curse technique for the entire fight up until that last moment. Once Sukuna displays to Gojo that he has no intentions to use his slashing attacks to directly attack him, he hides and develops it using the 10 shadows until Gojo uses his ultimate technique and believes that Sukuna is defeated, fully manifesting his entire battle plan at that final moment. As it seems as if Sukuna's completely out of battle options due to Gojo destroying the 10 shadows wheel, when in truth, he had the slash that can cut through everything. Now on to another moment of this fight, this one being towards the end of chapter 228. Sukuna doesn't do anything here specifically, but that's what I wanted to point out. As the Battle of Domains reaches its climax, Sukuna begins to run away more and changes demeanor to a more passive one, with Gojo even questioning this behavior in the first place, asking why Sukuna wasn't using the 10 shadows at that moment. But we see the wheels spin and Gojo gets a nosebleed. At first, people believed that these two final moments were connected in one way or another, but in the end they were obviously separate. If Maharaga's wheel spinning were to indicate anything, I'm sure that this was to show the moment Sukuna enacted his plan of having Maharaga completely adapt to and study the Limitless for Sukuna, which is why, after this moment, he shifted into a completely passive fighting style for the rest of the fight. This also fits in with his previous fight with Yorozu, as Sukuna seemed to go completely into a passive state once activating the wheel, and once he was able to find a method that could bypass Yorozu's construction, he completely crushed her. Not to say that it was as easy when fighting Gojo, of course extra steps are needed in this case because he is fighting Gojo. After this moment, we move on to the end of chapter 230. Sukuna exhausts Gojo and it seems as if he's going to finish him off. He declares to Gojo that, "I'll close the barrier of my domain and you will be left with nowhere to run. And while I carve you to pieces, I'll even adapt to that infinity of yours." This quote is specifically interesting because in hindsight, it's Sukuna declaring his primary goal in this fight as he has Gojo on the ropes. To finally be able to understand the Limitless and get rid of it as an obstacle for him for the rest of time. And since Sukuna made this declaration, it was more than likely that Sukuna really thought he was going to finish off Gojo here, which is why he decided to simultaneously activate his domain and his 10 shadows technique. The domain allowing him to completely finish off Gojo obviously, and the 10 shadows to forcibly adapt to the infinity, and allow Sukuna to gain the instructions of bypassing the barrier much easier. In chapter 234, Sukuna is hiding in his shadow as his two Shikigami, Maharaga and Agito are fighting against Gojo for him. And as he contemplates his options in his next move, he suddenly says, "Maharaga, how long do you expect me to wait? This is not what I want to see. You're not Fushiguro Megumi Shadow anymore. You're mine. Show me what you can do." Maharaga casually slices off Gojo's arm and destroying a building behind him, and Sukuna approves this action. Of course, when anybody was first reading this part of the fight, they're led to assume that Sukuna was asking Maharaga to display more power and competence in the battle of the strongest, since he really hadn't done much but got bullied around by Gojo up until then. But of course, in retrospect, this is the moment that Maharaga had given Sukuna the key to eradicating the Limitless as a potential option not only for now, but for the rest of time. This is Maharaga showing Sukuna the second option he had been looking for in order to bypass the Limitless technique, instead of the first that required Maharaga's presence to be effective. To bring up Sukuna's passive nature in battle once more, when you first read the fight, it's like he's running away and solely relying on the 10 shadows to even have a chance at surviving the onslaught that Gojo was raining down upon him. But when you reread the fight, you can see that he's fighting as if he's attempting to understand the Limitless, as if the Limitless is a puzzle itself. Meanwhile, using the adaptation of the Dharma Chakra to eventually find a way to bypass it without the usage of the 10 shadows. Interestingly enough, we get a hint of this in their first fight, when Sukuna was able to figure out that Gojo doesn't have super speed as he initially thought. All of these tricks culminate into Sukuna evolving his technique and cutting Gojo in half, ending the battle, proving his superiority as not only a fighter, but a sorcerer, eradicating the primary trouble that not only Gojo, but all Limitless 6-Eye users can propose to him. Gojo went into this fight head on, relentlessly showing massive power, unlimited creativity, and overwhelming strength. Sukuna went into the battle with a plan that revolved around trickery, studying his opponent, and exploiting them. Through this battle, Sukuna displays to us what it truly means to be the strongest sorcerer through misleading Gojo and the audience multiple times in the battle, pretending to solely rely on the 10 shadows in the later half when he had multiple tools at his disposal. When it comes down to it, Sukuna truly played both us and Gojo. And I really believe this because a sorcerer is nothing but a con artist, right? I think it's also important to point out that I don't believe that Sukuna is this overwhelming calamity because he was simply strong, but more so because of his growth rate aptitude, and his intelligence as a sorcerer. His ability to learn, understand, and find a solution to abilities that could pose a threat to him has been shown more recently due to the power of opponents rising, being able to keep up with that overwhelming strength that we've seen for the first half of the series. And it's eerily similar now to what we saw from Mahito. Mahito being this newborn special grade who was somewhat strong, but not all the way there yet. And by the time we last see him, he's a complete monster. And that aptitude that they both had is what makes them stand out as monsters in sorcery. And Sukuna made sure to take full advantage of this when facing off against Gojo. And I'm sure that we'll be able to see Sukuna's trickery and adaptation in battle as the series continues for the next 2-3 years. And honestly, I don't believe I've caught everything that Sukuna may have done here, so if you see anything, feel free to let me know in the comments, because I really don't, I think there's more to what Sukuna has done here by tricking us. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, thank you so much for watching all the way through. Of course, I'll see you guys in the next one, and have an amazing day.